Hi, it's Alison and Lee from the Law School Toolbox and the Bar Exam Toolbox. Today we're talking about an integrated question set from the NextGen Bar Exam.
All right. Well, welcome to our next discussion about the integrated question sets. These are the new exciting part of the NextGen Bar Exam that everyone is going to start to get to take, that's getting rolled out starting in 2026. And if you're not sure what the NextGen is or what an integrated question set is, we've got some other great podcasts for you that we will link to in the show notes. But today, we are going to dive into the nitty gritty. We're going to do an integrated question set together. And it's super fun and a little anxiety inducing.
Yeah, so people probably haven't seen something like this yet in law school. They might start seeing them. So this might be part of your law school experience as well. But basically, these are a mixture of different kinds of questions. They can be based on a fact pattern. They can be based on law. They might be based on some type of evidence or whatever. I mean, they're very creative. You're going to have about 24 minutes, and there are very few samples, which is causing some anxiety. Everybody's working on it, but haven't been a lot super released. But we wrote one for you. So yeah, this is not an actual NCBE question. It's one based on the NCBE questions, but hopefully it'll give you a sense of kind of what you might be dealing with here.
Yeah. So, these are going to be surprising. It's okay. Everybody take a deep breath. We're going to walk through it together. But I do want you to think about while you're listening to this, is that it is something different, and you need to think about how it's getting pieced together, because it's not a single question like a lot of those essay questions in the past. So, just make sure that you're really listening to why this is different and why we think everybody needs to go through it. There are 2 official released questions on the NCBE website. This is inspired by some very old California bar fact patterns, but is, it is not official, but it is in the spirit.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Lee. Well, what are we going to see first?
Okay. So here's your sample integrated question set. So you'll get some instructions. So something like, this integrated question set is based on a common fact scenario and includes a mixture of multiple choice and short answer questions. Some questions test legal knowledge, while others assess practical lawyering skills that include client counseling, issue spotting, and legal analysis. Sweet.
Right. And then we have our time allocation. Do you think, is this actually on them? I don't know. It says approximately 25 minutes. So that,
yeah,
I would assume maybe
I can't do 24 minutes, guys.
Yeah.
I need it to be like a nice, solid multiple of 5. I don't know. The 24 minutes really drives me crazy.
Yeah.
All right. So this one, we're starting with a client interview excerpt. And this is like what you would see to begin this integrated question set. All right. So, do we want to role play? Do you want to be someone and I can be someone? Okay. Do you want to be the attorney?
Sure.
Okay, great. So here's your prompt. You are an associate at Monahan and Burgess. So it's pretty clear why you need to be the attorney. Your supervisor, Sarah Monahan, conducted an initial interview with a potential client, Peter Jones, regarding an incident at Quickie Mart convenience store. Below is an excerpt of that interview. Okay, here we go.
All right, Peter, walk me through what happened when you and your roommate went to the store.
We went to Quickie Mart to grab some snacks and drinks for a study group that night. Marcus and I were browsing around different aisles. After about 15 minutes, I noticed Marcus had opened a large bag of grapes from the produce section and was eating them while he shopped. I thought it was weird, but I was focused on finding energy drinks.
And how long were you in the store total?
I mean, maybe 45 minutes. We paid for our stuff at the counter and walked outside to Marcus's car. Just as we got to the parking lot, this intimidating guy in a security uniform came jogging up and shouted, "Stop right there!" And he pointed at me and said, "I saw you eating those grapes without paying." I told him I didn't eat any grapes, and he said, "Right, it was your buddy here," and grabbed Marcus by the shoulder.
What was Marcus's reaction?
Marcus said something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I totally spaced out. Here, I can pay for them right now." But the security guy said, "Too late for that. You stole merchandise. I'm bringing both of you in." And that's when Marcus just bolted. He literally ran across the parking lot and disappeared behind some other stores and left me standing there with all of our purchases.
And why didn't you run too?
Well, I thought about it for a second, but this security guy was built like a linebacker, and I'm not exactly athletic. Plus, I was carrying shopping bags. He grabbed my arm and said, "You're coming with me," and basically pushed me back toward the store entrance.
And what happened once you were back inside?
He marched me to this cramped storage room behind the customer service counter. No windows, just shelves of inventory and a folding chair. He made me sit down and locked the door from the outside. I could hear him on his radio calling for backup. I started having an anxiety attack. I was sweating, heart racing, the whole thing.
Who else got involved?
After maybe 20 minutes, the security guy came back with the store manager and another employee. They demanded to see my driver's license. I told them they had no authority to hold me, but the manager said I was an accomplice and they could detain me until police arrived. They kept pressuring me. Just give us your friend's full name and where he lives and we'll let you slide.
And how did you respond?
I kept telling them I didn't do anything wrong and demanding they let me go. This went on for over an hour. They'd leave me alone in that room and then they'd come back to try again. I was getting more and more panicked. Finally, the manager brought a form and said if I signed it, they'd release me and not call the cops.
And what's happened since then?
I can't concentrate on my studies. I keep having flashbacks to being trapped in that room. I've been seeing a counselor at the campus health center, but they referred me to an outside therapist because this is beyond what they can handle. The sessions aren't covered by my student insurance. I'm furious that they put me through this when I didn't do anything wrong.
All right. Well, that's quite a story. And now our next thing, as we're sort of thinking through what the issues might be here, is some legal authority. So they have given us, we have given you, we've given ourselves a citation to a penal code about shoplifting. So what does that say, Lee?
All right. So it says Columbia Penal Code, Section 13-1, shoplifting, detaining suspect, defense to wrongful detention. So Section A, a person commits shoplifting if, while in an establishment in which merchandise is displayed for sale, such person knowingly obtains such goods of another with the intent to deprive that person of such goods by 1, removing any of the goods from the immediate display or from any other place within the establishment without paying the purchase price, or 2, charging the purchase price of the goods to a fictitious person or any person without that person's authority, or 3, paying less than the purchase price of the goods by some trick or artifice such as altering, removing, substituting, or otherwise disfiguring any label, price tag, or marking, or 4, transferring the goods from one container to another, or 5, concealment. So that was just Section A.
I'm already like, wait, what is even going on here? What is eating? Where does that fall in here? I don't know.
All right. Yeah. So now Section B, any person who knowingly conceals upon himself or another person unpurchased merchandise of any mercantile establishment while within the mercantile establishment shall be presumed to have the necessary culpable mental state pursuant to subsection A of this section. All right. That's Section B. Section C. A merchant or a merchant's agent or employee with reasonable cause may detain on the premises in a reasonable manner and for a reasonable time any person suspected of shoplifting, as defined in Section A of this section, for questioning or summoning a law enforcement officer. Well, this one sounds pretty important. So, yeah. And D, reasonable cause is a defense to a civil or criminal action against a peace officer, a merchant, or an agent or employee of such a merchant for false arrest, false or unlawful imprisonment, or wrongful detention. All right, so let's pause there.
All right.
How's your working memory, Alison? Do you remember everything we just covered?
Yeah, I'm like, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm wondering where eating falls into that long list of things in Part A. I'm wondering if the friend is a reasonable suspect, like there's a lot going on in this question, let's be honest.
There's a lot going on. And I think when you're listening to this, it's also important to think about the fact that you're skimming this on a computer screen. So, I mean, probably not surprising that I have been reading this. It's not memorized. And it is we are over 2 pages in of basically single space text. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that's how much some of this information will come to you as you go through it. And now you're going to be asked to apply that to questions. So we have first a multiple choice question. As we've discussed with the integrated question sets, you don't just get multiple choice questions where you choose one correct answer. Sometimes you'll select two. So we have that as well. But we're going to start with one where we just select one correct answer. So here's the question. Under Columbia Penal Code, Section 13.1, what is the most significant legal obstacle to Quickie Mart successfully claiming shopkeeper's privilege as a defense to Jones's false imprisonment claim?
Right. What are our options?
Our options. Option A, the detention lasted approximately 1 hour, which exceeds the statutory requirement for reasonable time. Option B, the store failed to summon a law enforcement officer during the detention as required by the statute. Option C, the store lacked reasonable cause to suspect Jones himself of shoplifting under the circumstances. And option D, the detention occurred in a storage room rather than a public area of the store premises.
All right. So this to me reads like kind of a classic MBE question.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yes. I mean, this is definitely closer to that.
I mean, if you drastically condense the fact pattern, it's kind of in the universe of like an MBE question. Like, okay, we just have to find the one reason. And I mean, it's C.
Yeah.
For those playing along at home, I'm going to go with C.
Yes. So, I think that there are interesting things about these options that I would think about. I think when you're thinking about like retaining information about the facts and what's legally significant, I think it is interesting that, we chose to include here about the detention occurring in a storage room, right? I think that's one of those, that's the tricky question of like, is the storage room important? And you do have to have a little like legal knowledge of like, no, I mean, it's got to be like a room where they feel confined, but it could have been a storage room. It could have been an office. Yeah. Like that's not one of those legally significant facts that I would just, that is going to make a difference. So that's like an answer choice I would just toss out. Yeah. So, you do still want to go through each answer choice and use the same skills that you have used in other multiple choice to say like, no, that's not going to be a winner.
Right. And also I think you see the same advice that we give to people in the MBE, which is have an answer going into the questions. Mm-hmm. It applies there because as we discussed before reading the question, and I honestly haven't read these questions, I'm doing this on the fly. But as you and I talked about, just before we started reading them, I was like, well, one of the things I'm concerned about, is that basically they know this isn't the guy who did the shoplifting. So like, why would they have a right to detain him? And look at that. It's right there.
It's right there. Yeah. And I think that's how you're going to have to read these fact patterns is still hunting for legally significant facts. Why did the person writing this hypo make it so that Marcus, the person who actually ate the grapes, was not the person to do it? Right.
And, that's I feel like that's one of those things you're like,
significant facts.
You need to be taking that into the questions with you. Like that's kind of a red flag for me if I'm representing the store. Like you guys didn't have the right guy. Yeah. Kind of a problem. Yeah. Might negate some defenses. I don't know. Just throwing it out there.
Exactly. All right. So now let's move on to a question 2. This is a 6-option question set. Okay. Which is something they are introducing on the integrated question sets. And you need to pick 2. All right, so here we go. Based on the client interview and Columbia Penal Code, Section 13-1, which of the following factors would be most relevant to determining whether Quickie Mart's detention of Jones was conducted in a reasonable manner? So we're still saying in a reasonable manner because we know that that's legally significant. All right, so here we go. Option A, Jones was questioned by multiple store personnel simultaneously in a confined space. Option B, Jones was offered the option to provide his roommates full information in exchange for release. Option C, the security guard physically grabbed Jones's arm and pushed him back into the building. Option D, Jones was held in a windowless storage room with a door locked from the outside. Option E, the detention focused on obtaining information about a third party rather investigating Jones' alleged wrongdoing. And option F, Jones was required to sign a liability waiver as a condition of release. Okay, these are, 6 is a lot of answer choices.
They are a lot. And I'm literally looking at how these being like, what are they even asking? Like, what? I'm having a lot of trouble with a lot of these questions getting like the angle that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Like, I think I have an angle here, but I'm not 100% sure it's the angle that the NCB thinks I should be taking. Like, I don't know, Lee, what's your angle on this one?
This one, when I look at the answer choices, a lot of folks, I think, will end up scrolling back up to the statute to try and like kind of parse through it again and see. I mean, I would probably pull some of my own personal knowledge about shopkeeper's privilege and the ability to detain someone, only because I've seen lots of bar questions on this legal rule over the years. I'm no great towards experts. But I know that like this is a case where I'm like, I know that the storage room with the door locked, like that is, that is a true detention. That's bad.
That sounds bad to me.
Yeah, that is like, if you're saying false imprisonment, that like, that is imprisoning someone. And so I feel like that one, I'm like, okay, well, I have personal knowledge of the law that makes me feel like that is significant. I also feel like there's something about the choice for the security guard to drag him back in, that he was not free to leave. He wasn't asked to come. He was like physically maneuvered. That also feels like some sort of detention. So that one, those are kind of like, okay, those feel like legally significant to me. But I also will be honest, I think that I'm pulling more from my outside knowledge of questions on this than necessarily the question itself. And I think that's where this gets a little squishy is, are we using the stuff presented to us, or do we have to pull from outside knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, those are the same two that I kind of settled on as being like the most egregious behavior, but also like I mean, I could see somebody being, you're questioned by multiple personnel simultaneously in this confined space. This guy says he has anxiety attacks, I'm like, that's not great either, but I don't think it's like as egregious as C or D.
Yeah. I think the liability waiver, that's not important. Like so that's whatever. That's a throwaway. I also think this issue of like the third party, they're trying to get information. I mean, the reality is this person didn't shoplift. And so right. I just like,
and if I go back to like my first year tort law about like the reasonable man and like whose perspective we're looking at this from, I guess that's why A is not as solid of an answer as like C might be, because it's pretty normal that you would have multiple personnel. Like if somebody happens to be, the eggshell plaintiff type of situation and they're very sensitive to that, well, it still doesn't mean it's not reasonable looking at it objectively. But like grabbing someone and pushing them into the building is more of an objective sort of like, that's not great.
No, and I think this idea is there are lots of things in these 6 options that are problematic, right? It's like they didn't do anything particularly well or right. I think it's pretty clear that this situation has gone off the deep end. But I think what makes these questions tricky and what these 6 options make tricky for me is you're basically asking for like the best ones, the ones that are like the most significant. And here there are many that are problematic, but it's like which ones are going to be the right answer to the very pointed question that you're being asked.
Right. I also think you have to read the call of the question very specifically because it'd be most relevant in determining whether their detention was conducted in a reasonable manner. So that puts a lot of this other stuff out the window because like, well, the detention being conducted in one way or the other doesn't have anything to do with whether they've got the right guy.
Yeah, that's very true. Or even if he's got to sign a liability waiver or whatever,
We're really talking about like the conditions of the actual detention. And so I think it's easy to go outside of that. But again, I think a lot of these questions are going to be like super specific and you really have to clue in on these kind of like bigger picture things. Like what are they really asking me about here?
Yeah.
I don't know. Did we get it right?
We did.
Okay. Good. Otherwise, that'd be really embarrassing.
I know. Then we'd have to edit the podcast. It'd be terrible. Okay, now question 3. This is an example of a short answer, which also comes up. Based on the client interview, which was the first thing
which I've already literally forgotten
which
what
you've
it
already
said.
forgotten. That's fine. We can refresh our recollection. Based on the client interview excerpt and Columbia Penal Code 13-1, identify 3 specific factual issues that would need to be investigated to determine whether Quickie Mart's detention of Jones was conducted in a reasonable manner. So we are staying in the reasonable manner space, but this is a different type of a question. It is 3 specific factual issues that would need to be investigated about this reasonable manner.
Interesting, because even though you read that several times. My mind immediately went to, well, what is the definition of reasonable? I need to get more legal information to know how to define that. That is not what the question is asking.
No, it is not. And I'm sure that some student will write that part of the answer and not get any points for it.
Exactly. So I mean, what they're basically asking us to do here is to go back into the interview excerpt and like look for stuff.
Yes. And go back and review the statute as well and the reasonable manner part of the statute.
Right. What do they say about a reasonable manner in the statute?
Right.
We have,
please.
We're literally like looking through this being like, what does it say about that?
I'm scrolling. That's what I'm doing to find it.
I'm literally scrolling up and skimming it to be like, does it say the words reasonable? Oh, yes. Part C. Okay.
Part C. Okay. A merchant or a merchant's agent or employee with reasonable cause may detain on the premises in a reasonable manner for a reasonable time any person suspected of shoplifting as defined in subsection A of this section for questioning or summoning law enforcement or summoning a law enforcement officer. All right.
So it doesn't really give us a lot to go on.
It doesn't give us a lot to go on. I mean, I think that, if I'm coming to this and I'm saying like, okay, well, I've been thinking about reasonable manner. And again, this is about false imprisonment, right? And I think what's interesting about this is you don't have the IRAC about what it's about. I think that if you can anchor yourself in the fact that this is about like false imprisonment and shopkeeper's privilege and have some understanding of that law, it does make these types of questions easier to manage. I think you're still pulling from the facts, you're still pulling from the statute, but I, again, am going to think more about what I know about shopkeeper's privilege.
You're like, what would be reasonable here? All right, what are some things we might need to look at? And then we just look for those things.
Right, exactly. I mean, we've talked about him a little bit, right? We've got about like where they detained him, although like maybe the fact that it's like a storeroom versus an office isn't important, but the fact that it was like, a storeroom and there's like stuff, and then maybe you want to, get more facts about like, I don't know.
How big is the room?
Yeah,
like,
was there ventilation? Did it smell bad? Was it dark? Did they leave
was
lights
it moldy?
on? Yeah, I mean, like, were there mops? I don't know. There could be lots of facts that you'd want to raise.
Yeah, like chemicals that smelled bad. You can think of anything. And I feel like in some ways it doesn't matter that much what you say. You just need to like say something that makes some sense.
Yeah, that makes some sense. We also talked about like, that physical force piece in the last multiple choice question. And that fact is really like very specific that they added in. Like when I'm thinking about that interview, the fact that he grabbed his arm and moved him, it was something that I like personally will take note of and say like, okay, well, that fact is there for a reason, right?
Like red flag. Grabbing somebody for no reason, probably not generally advisable.
Yeah. And so, we probably want to know more about what actually happened, right? Were there bruises? I don't know. Like, were there marks left on his arm? Was his arm sore? Did other people see the force used? Was somebody's grandma also coming from the Quickie Mart and could testify about what she saw? So I think that there's like that piece, whenever something is reasonable and somebody's using physical force, I feel like that's like always a red flag of like, I don't know, is that reasonable? Like usually physical force is a red flag that's open for discussion.
Right. Yeah. And then I think you got to go with the timing. I mean, he says, over an hour, they kept coming back and trying again. Was that reasonable? I mean, they know he's even the right guy. Like at some point you're like, maybe they could have brought him in for 5 minutes and been like, hey, can you tell us your friend's name? And he says no. And then they're like, all right, well, call us if you change your mind.
Yeah.
But like holding him an hour and like coming back in over like some grapes that already got eaten by someone else. Like that doesn't feel reasonable to me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think those three would be the top ones that I would outline for this question. I think, but I think what's interesting is this is very different from any other sort of bar question. I mean, like this doesn't even feel like a law school exam question. Maybe you would have to pull some of this out, but this idea of like, what more information do you need? Like that's a very different kind of question.
Well, I think it's weird because we're used to being like, well, what does the statute require? Like, what is reasonable force? Like, tell me what that is and I'll tell you what information you need. But we don't have that piece.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, granted, this isn't an NCBE question, but I think this feeling of I don't have this information is something that you're going to come up a lot in these integrated question sets. I think it's going to feel like I would like further explanation on that, and there's no one to ask because
there's nobody there.
There's nobody there. So, all right. So we're going to do one more short answer, but I do want to pause and note that what I didn't include in this sample was this kind of medium length answer, which is a longer essay answer in an integrated question set, partially because doing that, like I couldn't figure out exactly how to do that well on the podcast.
Well, I'm not even sure we've even seen one, so we don't even know what it would be.
I think we have seen one. We have seen one. But anyway, so this isn't the entirety of the universe of what you can see. This is just a sampling of some of the questions, but I just wanted to call that out. All right. So question 4 is another short answer. Jones asks you, the security guard told me Marcus was the one who ate the grapes, not me. He even said, right, it was your buddy here. If they knew I didn't do anything, how can they claim they had reasonable cause to hold me? So explain whether Quickie Mart can successfully claim reasonable cause under Columbia Penal Code, Section 13.1, given these facts.
All right, well, let's go back to the statute because we're
Let's
like,
go back
what
to
does
the
it
statute.
say?
Scroll,
Yeah,
scrolling back,
D.
scrolling back.
Reasonable cause is a defense to a civil or criminal action against a peace officer, a merchant, or an agent or employee of the merchant, of such merchant for false arrest, false or unlawful imprisonment, or wrongful detention.
Cool. So we don't know exactly what reasonable cause is. I mean, we know that's reasonable.
I mean, it's
It
a
sounds
defense.
ambiguous. It sounds
The
like
first thing I'm
ambiguity.
going through is like, okay, does this guy who like did this fall into one of those categories? Seems pretty clear. Yes. Although I would actually want to go back to the transcript and double check that he was an employee. I mean, I'm assuming he is because he was a security guard, but do we have that information? You know, that's something we'd want to look at.
Yeah. So I think this is one of those situations where, you know, you've got this clause in the statute and then you also probably need to go back to the facts and refresh your recollection because
it's
I mean,
actually
we've been
kind of
talking.
interesting.
Yeah, we've been
It
talking
says-
for a bit now, but we're still not at 24 minutes. So this is really like I think it is important to realize that this is around the amount of time that you would be wrestling with this material.
Yeah, and also, I mean, what the statute or what the transcript of the interview actually says about the guy is this intimidating guy in a security uniform. So we assumed that he was doing security for the store. I mean, I would have to literally go back and reread all of this to see if it actually says at any point that he worked for the store, because I'm not sure that's even in here.
Yeah, that's true. So you'd probably want to acknowledge that and say, like, we need to make sure the security guard was actually employed by the store.
Right. Was he just some dude? You know, who knows? I mean, actually, I'm skimming it now. I don't see anything in here that says he actually worked for the store.
No.
Which is an interesting data point.
It is an interesting data point. But will that be on the rubric? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you need reasonable cause. And, you know, here I think the big issue is it's not Jones that stole the grapes or ate the grapes. Like, Jones was just buying his energy drinks and going home to study.
Right. And importantly, the hypo gives us the fact that the security guard knew that. So if he knew that, he should have also known that he did not have reasonable cause to like detain him.
Yes. And I think that that is one of those facts that should be like blinking at you. Like, they, you know, it's like they detained the person who didn't do the actual shoplifting.
Knowingly detained.
And that is going to be a problem.
Yeah. So if I'm Quickie Mart's lawyer, I'm feeling like they need to settle this one pretty fast.
Yeah, this is not going to
maybe
go
pay
over
for
well.
pay for some therapy, like give the guy some money, go away, apologize. You're not going to win this case.
You're not going to win this because you can't. I don't know how you justify what they did based on the fact that they were just looking for a name. Yeah, this is pretty bad. Panic
Which they
attacks.
actually literally had no right to do because they are not a police officer.
Right, and they didn't call the police.
Right.
So that
and
was
even
also
the
a problem.
police like wouldn't actually really have had rights around that. But you know, the different conversation. Don't start writing about the police in this.
No,
option,
do not.
you know?
Don't. No, it's not going to be on the rubric.
This is not Fourth Amendment or Fifth Amendment or whichever one of those amendments that is. You know?
I know. So all right. So basically, let's wrap this idea up. This is like an example, I would say, on the easier end.
Yeah, because it was
an integrated
obvious.
question set. It's pretty obvious. I think this fact pattern is not particularly challenging. I chose it because of that. It's not a particularly intimidating fact pattern. I I think one of the things that's interesting for folks to note if they've been listening to this is, we've mentioned that we're worried about how everyone's working memory is going to handle these fact patterns, because you do have to recall a lot of stuff that you've read while you're doing these question sets. You have to scroll. We've told you when we have to scroll back to reference other things. And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I didn't remember that, it was grapes, or I didn't remember that the security guard said that he knew it wasn't his friend, I think that is something you want to take note of, because you're going to need to hold a lot of this information in your head, and that's going to take a lot of practice. So I think it's interesting to do it in this format, because I do think it highlights how challenging it is to hold this whole story. And are you going to have time to go back and forth and reread whole sections over and over again? I think in some cases not.
Right. But I think at the same time, you also want to be aware of the things that you do probably need to check. It's like, well, we all assumed that the guy worked for the store, but it's actually not in there.
Right.
And I've seen a different question where like that was kind of the sort of thing they were testing you on, essentially, was like the assumptions that you were making. And there were reasonable assumptions based on the storyline, but, it's like the person didn't actually say that like they weren't going to pay the contract. They just didn't pay it, that kind of thing, that level of detail. I think you're going to have to really learn to focus on what you need to check versus what you don't have time to check.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's our practice integrated question set.
How fun.
On the easy, if there's a scale, I would say that's on the easier end.
Yeah.
Walking through it together, do you have any other final thoughts for folks that are hearing some of these questions for the first time?
No, I think you're just going to have to like practice and get used to them. I don't think they're impossibly hard, but I also don't think they're easy.
Yeah. One thing that we did not include in this practice set that's in one of the NextGen official practice sets, which everyone should go download and read, is like pleadings and civil procedure questions of stuff. And I think for a lot of people who didn't enjoy civil procedure, including myself, those questions are somewhat anxiety inducing. And so I would just look at the universe that they are releasing for now, so you can understand really what you're going to be responsible for. I think the more knowledge you have, the better you're going to be equipped to, use your bar providers to get as ready for this test as you can. But knowledge is power, so make sure you educate yourself on it. But we hope that this exercise has been enlightening.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening and watching, and we'll talk soon.